As the administrator for the STEM Cell Initiative that has just been.
So now you guys initiative. Sorry about that. And we have one person from Freeport, right?
Yes, sure, but he isn't online as yet.
Okay. We have a new engine. Welcome, ma'am. Yeah, you are. Sing your favorite song and tell us your name.
I don't know the favorite song, but my name is Duranda Midas.
You work at?
I work at Central Bank.
Central Bank. All right. So, good group of people. If I mess up today, I have a lot of litigators to defend me, I see. A couple of people who I can borrow from to bail me out. PMH, Public Health Authority, if I break down to get up some business. All right. So, we are going to talk about money laundering, right? And we have guys from the FIU, we have tons of lawyers, people just call to the bar, all sorts of stuff inside. So, it's going to be proactive. I'm really not here to stand up here and lecture to you, right? It's an interaction. We all are adult people. One of the approaches I always use is I always assume you know way more about this subject than you think you know, right? And so my job becomes easy. All I need to do is to blame that out of your head. Just to take that out of you. So, anybody? What's this whole thing about money laundering? Talk to me. What is money laundering? Tell me in your own words. Close the book. Close the book. Close the book. Close the book, please. Close the book. Close the book. Close the book. Close the book. Wait, I will wait until everybody closes the book. You know, I'm sure some of you did some reading, but don't worry about that. What is money laundering? Yes.
Okay, money laundering is where illegitimate funds taken from criminal activities to, I guess, layer it to make it, I guess, legitimate. Something in that aspect.
You've been reading?
No, we have to do this every year.
Okay, all right. We can put it all together. So, I hear some words. I can't spell. Illegitimate. Layering. Sorry, I can't spell. That's why they put spell check on the phones and stuff. What does it say? Legitimate to make it what?
To make it legitimate.
To make it legit. Okay, I can spell that one. And you had to mention funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anybody else? Somebody who read last night. Yeah, go ahead.
When criminals disguise the true origin of the funds.
Sir?
When criminals disguise the true origin.
Okay, so true origin of funds, right? I need the word disguise. UISC, something like that. Yeah, anybody else? Somebody knocked my socks off. Give me one. Big fancy one. Come on. Listen. Listen. I have you for 4 units, right? Right. So it won't be long. But this is not the exam. There's absolutely nothing you can get wrong inside here. Right? And this is a place to talk all the foolishness. So let's go. Let's talk. Yes, sir.
Yeah, money laundering is normally a 3-phase process. You have, as mentioned, you have the placement. You have the,
It's go again?
it's normally a 3-phase process.
3-phase?
Normally.
Okay, so we into some electrical thing now, right?
Where you have the placement.
One.
The monies go into the account.
Placement.
You have the layering, and that is where it is transferred.
Layering.
Yes, and then you have the integration.
Okay.
It comes back to the bad guy.
Okay.
Appearing to be legitimate.
Appearing to be legitimate. So you go boom, boom, and then your money is now nice and clean, right? That's what you said?
That's the intent. Yes.
That's the intent.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Good morning.
Good morning.
Name and favorite song?
Dana, my name's favorite song.
I'm just joking about it.
Oh, because I was wondering. Thank you.
You are from? Where you work?
Societe General.
Huh?
Societe General.
Oh, associated, one of them fancy banks, right? All right, anybody else? We were just asking what is money laundering. All right, okay, so let's read what the thing says. It's a process by which criminals attempt to conceal the true origin and ownership of the proceeds of criminal acts. True or false? And pretty much that's what you were trying to say, right? Yeah, I think most people hit it, right? Now, there are some things which have been said, and we'll come back to them, right? Because there's a couple of things which I need to clarify. But let's dissect that. It says it's the process by which criminals attempt to conceal the origin of the ownership of the proceeds of their criminal acts. So, one of the most fundamental thing about money laundering is, right, before you can have money laundering, there must be illicit funds. Now, the definition can be, that definition there can be deceptive. Do you consider yourself a criminal? Anybody inside here consider yourself a criminal? No? We have some lawyers, we have some bankers, right? Is it possible for any one of you to launder money? How?
By assisting others.
By assisting others, right? Could you do it innocently? Would you be a launderer?
Yeah.
Talk to me. Would you be a launderer? Could you go to jail?
Yes.
Why? How?
You have to prove knowledge, though.
Huh?
You have to prove knowledge.
Okay, my lawyer talking to me. You have to prove knowledge, or I can apply a reasonableness test. You ought to have known. A reasonable person with your knowledge ought to have known. So, when the definition says the means by which criminals, right, you automatically may categorize one particular group of people, right? Yeah? But it's the means by which funds which are illicit are converted to become or to look legal. The reason I'm pointing that out is I don't want you to start thinking that unless it's one of them guys you see shuffling down Bay Street or on the corner selling the drugs, right? Those are the people who are only likely to be the launderer. Within the organization, persons could innocently, well, quote unquote innocently, because once the courts or the legal system applies the test, then you will find that person wouldn't be considered to be innocent. That person would be negligent in some way in helping that individual actually launder the money. So be, what word I'm looking for, be open-minded as to who you potentially classify. At the end of the day though, when the laundering takes place, is whosoever helped in the whole process then becomes the launderer. Alright? Now, there is a nexus here, right? Because actually occurs is anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. True? So what's terrorist financing and what's its relationship to money laundering?
Well, for the most part, it's the financing of terrorist activities, but the difference is that with anti-money laundering, there has to be illicit or illegal funds, whereas for terrorist financing, in most cases, it actually comes from a legitimate source, but it just goes towards financing terrorists and so forth.
Seriously, yeah, come to the head of the class. Yep. That's exactly right. There is a simple nuance between the two in that terrorist financing need not be from illicit source. So, if you go to work, you work, $200,000 a year, but you have a very soft heart for some jihad someplace in the Middle East, and you send all of your money to them, right? Legitimately earned money, but you send it just the same via wire transfer. And you send it to Osama bin Laden's nephew since Osama is dead, right? To go blow up some people. That is terrorist financing. Now, there is a nexus because terrorist financing tends to originate from illegal activity. Take, for example, let's cast our minds over to Afghanistan, right? One of the biggest driver of a lot of the legal activity, well, the terrorist activities in Afghanistan is what? Opium. They literally plant opium like oodles and oodles of poppy fields from which opium is made, right? So the world views opium as an illegal substance, right? So that's where the illicit activity is. The money is then converted and used to fund it. Take, for example, some of these guys, the ISIS groups, which are operating in the Middle East, right? We know they're bad people. But what do? They steal oil, yeah? They capture them, steal the oil with tap in the pipelines or whatever, but they steal the oil. The act of stealing is illegal, true? Then they sell the oil to fund their activities. So it's illicit. So it's terrorist financing. What they do, what they are is a terrorist cell. And so illegal activity or illegal proceeds can go to fund them. But the main difference between terrorist financing and straight money laundering is that the funds can come from legal activities. Correct. Okay. So we kind of laid a framework as to what this is. Why are we here though? Why are we in class today? I know it's Saturday morning and usually you're out getting south or something. We got engaged. Why are we here? What would have driven us here? Are we in class this morning because we want to learn to be launderers? No? So why are we here? Talk to me, please.
To come back.
If you don't talk to me, this is going to be a 30 minutes class. I can teach this in 30 minutes.
We want to learn more about money laundering, how we can counteract it.
Yeah, you don't want to go in 30 minutes. That's good. You want to learn
More about
money laundering and how you can counteract it.
Yes.
I bet you almost every single one of you in here, and maybe one or two, hopefully not, you're here to learn how to become the catchers of launderers if there ever were, right? Or to create systems or to manage systems which prevent these activities from happening. That's why we're here, right? So, on what basis are we going to be working? What is it that we're going to be using? What are our tools? Talk to me. Y'all work in the bank, you're lawyers. Legislation. There you go. There you go. The stuff in the book is hard, you know, but if you think about it differently, it becomes easier. So, legislation. What, therefore, are the legislation? Let's come home to the Bahamas. What, therefore, are the legislation which enables us to be sitting here and talking about anti-money laundering? Huh?
Proceeds of crime.
Proceeds of Crime Act, so POCA. Anything else?
Transactions
Huh?
Regulations Act.
The
Financial Transactions.
FTRA. Next, anyone else?
FIU Act.
The FIU Act. Cool. Anything else?
TS.
The
TS.
TS maybe, possible, yeah? Anything else? FTRR. FTRR, right? Isn't there a set of regulations attached to the act? Yeah? Anything else? No? What does my note say? Ever heard about that guy?
Yeah.
FATF? Big important organization. So, as you will see in your notes at 1.4, and it asks the question, what constitutes an AML, counter-terrorist financing framework? Right? And it said typically these laws and regulations involve criminalizing laundering and defining the underlying criminal offenses, criminalizing terrorist financing on the basis of UN Terrorist Financing Convention, defining the business, which businesses are subject to AML CTF laws, establishing requirements that reporting entity must follow, creating government agencies for dealing with suspicious information such as the FIU, creating one or more supervisory authorities to oversee compliance, nominating law enforcement and government bodies which will assess reports received about suspicion of money laundering. So within this whole scheme, right, for our purposes, we have entities like the central bank, true? And also Securities Commission of the Bahamas, right? And then I think you have the Compliance Commission, true? Anything else?
FIU.
We have the FIU there already. Anybody else?
And you have gaming board.
You have Gaming Board,
You have insurance commission.
Insurance Commission, yeah? And maybe we can just throw in the police. Cover the whole thing. So, in terms of our anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, right? There is a framework against which we are working, we use. That's what's enabling us. So first of all, the Proceeds of Crime Act. I can show you something very closely. Big topic locally. The Proceeds of Crime Act is, the lawyers can help me out, yeah, is the legislation which enables the punishment of money laundering. True or false? True. Okay. Everybody agree? Let me ask you a question. Why aren't, well, we got cast our mind back to a couple months ago. Why aren't the people who sell numbers, why weren't they money launderers?
Because
In respect of the numbers which they were selling.
That's up to the others.
That's still up.
No, I mean, don't get it complicated with the other stuff that we think about on a daily basis. Just limit it to numbers, the proceeds from numbers. Why weren't they launderers? Go ahead.
Some of them are operating under like, well, cafes, and some of their servers are not located in the Bahamas. But, so they couldn't really.
No. Partially, but that's not the reason.
But I'm just thinking because in most cases, a lot of them weren't allowed to deposit their funds into accounts.
Oh, they don't have to deposit it into accounts.
I
Now, then again, and this is, we'll come back when we talk about this 3 layer, right? Never confuse laundering with banks. Have nothing to do with banks. Banks play an important part of it for a reason, but laundering don't have to have banks. Simple example. I get a pound of something, and I stand on the corner and I sell it, right? What do I have? Huh? I have cash, right? I walk over to the parking lot where a lot of you park, and I show one of you if they have a fancy car. I like it. I give you the cash. I have a car. You have the cash. I just laundered the proceeds of my pound. No bank. Now, you may put the money in the bank, but the laundering from me completed there. And I can come back to some other things in the same example. So, let me write down. Right beside this, 1 pound, right? Yeah. So what we were saying, the fundamental reason why they weren't laundering is that as far as the Proceeds of Crime Act is concerned, selling numbers was not a predicate offense for money laundering purposes. Plain and simple as that. Unless the law says it was a predicate offense, I hope I'm pronouncing the word right, meaning that it's an offense which the law defines as being necessary in the first instance for there to be money laundering? There's none. So stuff like selling drugs, trading in trafficking in people, prostitution, all that sort of stuff. You participate in those activities. The proceeds from that is when you do your laundering thing, it's money laundering. For the purpose of those money, for the purpose of the persons who were selling numbers, it wasn't. If you remember, one operator was actually found guilty, but was just found guilty of doing some other things, not money laundering. And so that's why poker is important. And as it says here, right? Which one of them says? Criminalizing money laundering. See, the first one, criminalizing money laundering and defining the underlying offenses. So first of all, you need to have the underlying offenses defined and say, these offenses, if committed, the proceeds from them leads to money laundering. That's very, very important. On a point of technicality, if that's not there, you may be charged with some other things, yeah, but not money laundering. So that's very important. The importance of the various agencies. Central bank, for example, supervises all most of the financial institutions. Financial institutions have an obligation to report suspicious transactions to the FIU, and the FIU does some things. You with the FIU, right? Yes. Okay. So you can help us out there. But take a simple thing as this. I'm looking at a transaction and it doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right. And I have a whole process inside my bank which says I raise of unusual transaction report, right? I then report it over to the FIU. One of the things which I'm doing is fulfilling my obligation legally, yeah? But it goes beyond that. In terms of my institution, I'm also protecting my institution. Because a lot of time when you report stuff to the FIU, they don't come back immediately and say, stop. A lot of time, in fact, they may say the opposite. They may say, continue doing business with this individual so that we can watch the trend. They may even come back and say, we turn it over. We don't really see no basis on which to come back to you, but you still have to make a decision whether or not this individual, you still want to carry on business with this individual. Now, if something goes wrong further down the road, right, because there are personal obligations under the law, if something goes wrong, you can always then fall back on the fact that I did see it, I did have some suspicion, I did my legwork, and I reported over to that guy. He's the one who didn't do anything per se, all right? In a way, it's a defensive position for your institution. Or at least it can provide you with some sort of a safe harbor, right? But you'll get into that when you get into the compliance leg of the course. What are some of the implications of money laundering, generally speaking? What are some of the implications on the society, the institution? Talk to me.
Well, it creates a false economy.
It creates a false economy?
False economy when the money is illegal, money is allowed just to run.
Don't lose sight of the fact that it creates an economy.
Say again.
Don't lose sight of the fact that it creates an economy.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's an illegal economy.
Yes.
You know, usually referred to as a black market, on the ground sort of thing. Yes, that's true. What else?
Blacklisting.
Blacklisting?
Yeah.
So it puts the jurisdiction, it puts your country at risk of being sanctioned by international organization. And that is very important, right? Because especially as it relates to the financial services industry, no institution in the Bahamas functions without being plugged into the global financial services. For example, and we take it for granted, we write a check to pay, not too used to this. No. Who? American Express. Yeah, you're the one who do the shopping in the States. I don't know these things. A lot of us shop in the States, pay checks to to satisfy those obligations, right? Every time you write a US dollar check, where does it go? Huh?
Central bank.
It has to go through the US clearing system, a corresponding bank. It must. Every time you write a GBP check or a euro, it has to go through there. So while we're sitting there and saying we're going to our bank, in a way, we're going to the world. And through that mechanism, we can be sanctioned, right? No, well, because of that, when you get sanctioned, it becomes difficult for the country because the institutions may decide, well, we're not going to have a relationship with the local banks, yeah? So it's very important, like you said, one of the implications is the potential for sanctions. Anything else? Money laundering. Let's go back to the source. Illicit funds.
Breeds criminality.
It breeds criminality. So drug running, organized gangs, trafficking in persons, right? What else? Corruption, right? When a guy have a lot of money and can get a lot more very quickly, he's likely to want to pay his way through, right? Will corrupt the system. So eventually, that has an impact on the reputation of the country. It has an impact on the reputation of institutions within the country, right? And it gives the perception that, look, if you want to do business, and this is now the world looking in, right? If you want to do business, really this is one of the places you may want to avoid. Take the Bahamas as an example. Where does the Bahamas get most of its investment from? What's the model here? Tourism. What else? Huh? Banking. What else? Bahama, Kurzna, Albany, foreign direct investments. True? When a investor sits down and take the Bahamas and some other countries, say within the region, and say, I want to go to one of these. First and foremost, he's looking at how much profit he can make, right? But there are a lot of things which goes into that consideration. Recently, there was a news article, somebody here worked at BEC, right? So probably that had nothing to do with you. But there was a news article which reports that a contract was given to BEC back in the day, and somebody took a bribe. Anybody heard about it?
Yes.
Did you hear what happened to the company which paid a bribe? How much? Huh? Enough for me to give all of you at least one and still have a whole lot of millions for myself. Yeah? That's what happened. Now, when a company is sitting there the people with the money, they're concerned about stuff like that. You said corruption, right? The possibility that in order to get there, somebody's going to bribe you. We don't know if this is true, but obviously the guys say yes and they pay the money. So there must be some substance to that. That's not our concern here. The only thing I'm pointing out is that the reputation or the actual actions which happen on the ground can impact investment decisions. And because the Bahamas, for example, is driven a lot by foreign direct investment, you can imagine people making the shift and saying, we're not going there because we run the risk of losing our shares, so let's shift it someplace else. All right? So that's the potential. Somebody mentioned tourism. There is a direct nexus between tourism and crime, yeah? True?
Yeah.
I'm too sure.
Yeah.
You sure? My theory is the more crime, the more the people come to see. Otherwise, they wouldn't go to Mexico, they wouldn't go to Jamaica, they wouldn't go to some other places. But, that's just my dark thought. But there are some persons who will not come if they know that the level of crime is high, right? What does that have to do with laundering? Laundering comes sometimes involve organized crime, right? Organized crime involves some people who kill each other. And if they need to kill the other, they'll shoot you too, just to get the other, right? And so that creates a fear of crime. So the implications on the society is huge, and so we can't ignore that. So money laundering has a big impact on society, all right? I think there's an example here. Okay, this talks about the reputation of the financial institution. I'm going to show you something very quickly. That's your bank, right? Nice and sparkling. And that's Mr. Launderer. So this is your bank post pre him, all right? He then becomes a customer of your bank, right? Because maybe your AML systems weren't robust enough and you didn't catch him, or something just went wrong. Or we did catch him, but the person who caught him got paid and let him in. We dealing with the whole issue of corruption and stuff. So that's your bank post Mr. Launderer. What is happening there? The institution is impacted by this one individual, yeah? All of a sudden, your sparkling reputation is solid, yeah? So, persons usually say, well, if you go into the Bahamas, this is the bank you want to be with. Let's say they're offshore, because this is the bank you want to be with. All of a sudden, there's a big news article that you wittingly or unwittingly facilitate a money laundering scheme for hundreds of millions of dollars. What's going to happen to you? Yeah, talk to me. What's going to happen? Just think about it, man. Be creative. What's going to happen? You have 50 clients. 51. One was the launderer, the other 50 was really good people. What's going to happen with the other 50? They're going to start withdrawing, right? And then what's going to happen?
The staff going to be cut.
The staff going to be cut. And
the integrity of the bank is at jeopardy.
the integrity of the bank is at risk or totally gone, right? You're going to then start losing money. And then you're then going to be totally out of business. So reputation, risk, crystallizes because of which risk? Talk to me. Reputational risk crystallizes because of you had a money laundering risk which wasn't properly managed. That's what at the end of the day, and you will learn more of this as you go into the compliance segment. At the end of the day, money laundering is a risk. And what we're doing here is learning how to combat that. All of the systems, all of the processes that we have in place, right? What is it that the Proceeds of Crime Act is doing? Trying to counter that. What is it that the internal systems that we put in place when we say we need KYC, we need to know who your mother is, we need to know who your father, and 10 generations. What are we doing? We try to ensure that as best as possible, this individual that comes into the organization, right, is legitimate. True? That's what we're doing. So we manage in risk. And when that fails, however it fails, when that fails, it then impacts other risks. You have a reputation risk. And it crystallizes. And then that old reputational risk then crystallizes or transforms into financial risk. And financial risk from the perspective that you no longer have customers. Yeah? And therefore you're no longer making money. And since businesses are in the business of making money and can only sustain themselves when they do make money, you're going to be out of business. And a whole lot of things can happen in between here which could make this bank become broken, right? Take for example, where is it? Let me find one of these guys. They get involved. Sure? The regulators. bad guys, the police. They get involved. Some people go into jail, right? When you look at your AML framework, for example, I think some of you here are a compliance officer or may aspire to become a compliance officer. One of the things I always say, there's a fox-ill clause in all of these arrangements, yeah? Which says if you don't do what you do, you literally could go to jail. So it's not only reputational at the institutional level, but you are too. Certainly, if you fail to do your work and you go to jail as a compliance officer, one of the things you're not going to be again, I would think, is a compliance officer anyway. Right? It's going to be career disrupting. True? So, there are personal implications, there are institutional implications, and there are also societal implications, national implications, international implications. Because if a jurisdiction has a weak AML framework, yeah, then guess what's going to happen? What's going to happen? If Timbuktu have no laws, right? Where the launderers going to end up? Timbuktu. And if they have a financial system, what they're going to do is attack this financial system to get the stuff into the global system. And as a result of that, Timbuktu weakens the global financial system. And so, really, our framework, our AML framework, counter-terrorist financing framework, isn't limited simply to the integrity of the Bahamas as a country. Right? It has implication for the entire global financial system. The chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So that's some of the things. Let me just read it. It says, if funds from criminal activity can be easily processed through a particular institution. Again, here's the weak link, right? Particular institution or a particular jurisdiction, either because its employees or directors are getting bribed, or are colluding with criminals, or because the institution turns a blind eye to the criminal nature of such funds, that is irresponsible non-compliance. The institution can be drawn into active complicity and become part of the criminal network itself. Evidence of such complicity will adversely affect the reputation, and in extreme cases will result in prosecutions and loss of its license to undertake financial business. So successful laundering through a financial institution will also damage the reputation and integrity of the financial center in which the institution is located. In extreme cases, it can also contaminate legal transactions and increase the volatility of international capital flow and exchange rates. It's exactly what we just said, in different words. Right? It is in many ways, and I like pictures. If you remember it this way, it's kind of the Bahamas, yeah? And then that's the globe. So the implication is that if the financial institution, right, has a weakened system, framework, then that impacts the country, right, which in terms could impact the global situation, right? And like I said, there is attendant implication for the individual. It talks here about prosecution, right? The company can be prosecuted and the individuals can be prosecuted, whether it's for corruption on the AML or some other laws, all right? So that's where you got it. Here's an example. In June 2013, Lebanese Canadian Bank agreed to pay $102 million fine to the U.S. Department of Justice to settle a claim that accused the bank of being the center for global money laundering scheme tied to militant arm of Hezbollah, through which the banking system was used to launder drug trafficking profits from West Africa back to Lebanon. So the fine was how much? 102. I mean, I could have used the 2. They could have used 100, right? But these are huge amount of monies in terms of fine. Prosecutors allege that between January 2007 and 2011, the bank had 2 exchange houses linked to Hezbollah and transferred at least $329 million to the United States to buy cars, which were subsequently sent to West Africa. Yeah? So the Lebanese Canadian bank had played a key role in laundering the proceeds of those car sales and profits from narcotics trafficking, enabling the money to arrive back in Lebanon. The bank went into liquidation after the Treasury Department designated as a primary money laundering concern in February 2012. See what's happening there? Going back to my colleague here who mentioned sanctions, right? That's one level of sanction. You can sanction or blacklist the whole country. But here was a specific designation for an institution. The Treasury Department, and the US is always the one who goes out and grabs everybody, you know, that's the police of the world, designate this institution primary money laundering concern. Who, after that designation, is going to put their money in that institution? Huh? Nobody. And so it's natural that it says here that this institution went into liquidation. Most of the bank's assets were acquired by SG, the Lebanese subsidiary of SG. 102 million fine was paid out of 150 million previously seized by the bank, from the bank by the US in August 2012. Hassan Assis Exchange Company, one of the exchange houses, agreed to forfeit 720,000. One little thing inside here I need to point out to you, which you shouldn't lose sight of. How much was the fine? How was it paid? Out of the 150 million, right? It's an important point, and I can make it right now. When financial institutions run or create corresponding banking relationship, where is the money? Where's the money that they owe with correspondent banks? Where is it? In the home country of the correspondent bank. So sometimes people jump up and say, well, find me. How are you going to pay me? Under the Patriot Act, right? Under the Patriot Act and other enabling legislation in the United States, all they simply did was freeze the 150,000 million, right? And when they find you, they take the money. What does that mean? Whose money usually that is? Huh? Talk to me, man. Let's get some vibes in there. Whose money that is? Your client's money, right? So let's say, for example, let's be very dramatic. Let's say this particular bank had customers. They owe customer 160 million. Yeah? The government, the US charged them, or the Treasury Department charged them and took 102. Can they repay their customers?
No.
The customer have lost the money, yeah? They must be liquidated. So, money laundering action has the potential of wiping out the organization clean. An institution like this, I don't know what their underlying deposit portfolio is, but we're just going to be dramatic and assume that it was about 160 million, right? Of which 150 was in the US system. Let's say the other the other 10 may have been in GBP or Euro, so that would have been in the UK system. The US seized 150, fined them, and subsequently took 102, right? A lot of people isn't going to be repaid. You have to go to business. In walks SG and buy out all of the good customers. Chances are very cheaper. You're out of business. And so the implication of ensuring that you manage your AML system effectively, right? And the implication of having a framework which actually works is huge at the organizational level, the individual level, and the country. So take for example, let's use this same Lebanese bank, right? It's a Lebanese Canadian bank, right? So that was in Canada, true? So let's make this look a bit more dramatic. The US decides, well, hey, the reason this bank was able to do what they do is because there's weak supervision in Canada, alright? This is not going to happen. But there's very weak supervision in Canada, and so they sanction Canada. They put Canada on a blacklist. What then starts to happen? Canada starts having challenges with its financial services. People start to look to different jurisdictions, alright? Remember back in the days when the Bahamas was blacklisted?
Yeah.
You never see so much grown men run up and down like they're crazy, right? You never see Parliament move as fast as it did. 11 pieces of legislation in maybe 2 weeks, right? Some of it we had to roll back, but things went quickly. Why? Because there was a recognition that the essential lifeblood of the country was at risk. Yes?
You know them banking. The banks insure the monies, right?
Yes.
So is it because of the criminal activities, like the monies are forfeited and they can't pay off the clients?
Yeah. Okay. As it relates to insurance, you gotta be very careful. If you insure your house and you burn it down, insurance company not paying you. Because you burn it down. Right? The first thing the insurance company does when a claim is made is ask, how can we not pay this? You're supposed to not facilitate money laundering, true? Chances are somewhere deep in your policy says, if your systems break down and you do not take reasonable steps to manage that, right? Because remember, they were found guilty. Chances are it's not going to be paid. At any rate, deposits in banks are usually not covered 100%. If you have $1 million in the bank, maybe 50,000 is covered, maximum. And that's usually through some deposit insurance type thing. So, you know, that wouldn't save them at all. It's not going to save them. All right. So we talk a lot about the impact on society and things. How are we doing for time? We're not going to be here for 3 hours. I can promise you that. Just about an hour. No. All right. Any questions? Anything you think I jump over? No? But let me ask you: Are you understanding the framework I'm in? I know you can read the stuff in there. What I'm trying to do really is to make sure that this is as practical as possible. This thing in the book is for real, but there's a real world out there, right? The central bank is right over there. You can walk over there and touch it. All right. We're not talking about places far, you know what I mean? If we live in the United States, we may never see the central bank. We know where it is right here. But in real terms, these things happen. There's a process, there's a system in place. One of the things I would encourage you to do is to go to the central bank website and browse. Go to the FATF website and browse. Print down the recommendations from the FATF. Find out what the various laws are. Central bank is a good point to start. One very, very good resource, I can tell you this. It's a 94-page document, which is a central bank guideline. I'm not sure what the exact name is. Remember, it's 94 pages. It's the central bank guidelines on money laundering. Go on the central bank website, print that down, and keep that as a resource. You will learn a hell of a lot from it. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And as much as I appreciate the fact that we're here to learn about anti-money laundering, just being the devil's advocate, is it not interesting also in learning this that one, we realize that most of the jurisdictions that place sanctions are, of course, what are considered first world countries. And normally the sanctions are placed on what is considered third world countries and banks and so forth. The reality is, if you look at the first world countries that make these sanctions, they are the driving force behind anti-money laundering and the proceeds of crime.
Yeah.
taking in consideration also to the case with Abachi in Nigeria, when
With who?
Abachi in Nigeria,
Abaka.
yes, where billions of dollars was actually
Okay.
taken out of the Nigerian government and sat right in City of London when they actually got court orders to get the money back. City of London basically said, no, we're not going to release the funds. But my thing is, funds were allowed to sit in that jurisdiction when they clearly had indication that this was perceived of crime. So this, like I said, as much as I appreciate the fact that we're here to learn it, the reality is we, the smaller countries, are paying the cost for the negligence based in these first world countries. And they cannot regulate their own borders, and we're here doing the footwork for them.
Okay. All right, so let me put on my activist cap like you. And I would agree. There's other things about this place which isn't for real. But let's, we have to talk about the FATF before we move to anything else. Anybody ever heard about that? Huh? Sure, I hope I'm spelling it right. Was for principle. Anybody ever hear about that?
No.
No? So you hear about FATF? IMF? Anyone else? Huh? G20? Anything else? Yeah, that's enough. Who are they? Who are they? These are the controllers. Now, the reason I put that there, coming to the FATF, let's cross this one out. Woodsbury Principle is a set of principles developed, I think, by some banks in some of the leading developed countries, right? And they set out these guidelines. But if you look what's coming out of the FATF, right, it's impacted by that and that in a large measure, and the IMF is in there someplace. Every time G20 meets, one of the things on the agenda they usually talk about is the financial system, right? And then they have these resolutions. And the resolutions sometimes impact or declarations. So they declare, we are going to wipe out all third world countries that do financial services. That becomes a mandate for these guys, and they set out about doing it. There was none ever dramatic as that. But they say, like, for example, we do not support bearer shares. Bearer shares are gone. We do not support shell banks. Shell banks are gone, right? We do not support banks without physical presence. Physical presence are gone. If you see what I'm getting at, these guys sneeze, we respond with a code. But it's important that we are respectful of the fact that the world has imposed this on us, right? And we, in our great wisdom, and by we I mean persons within the Caribbean here, right? We decide that we will have a CFATF, right? And so, if you look at it from this perspective, the FATF creates best practice, right? There is how much was it, the 40 recommendations plus 8, and then it reduced back to 40, special 9 or special 8, whatever the number was. But these are the best practices. And if you want to play in the global financial system, you need to then abide by these things. If you don't, right, you're going to be called offside and you're going to be kicked out of the game. So while I understand your advocacy and while, I would join you on the picket line as soon as you announce it, the fact of the matter is we cannot ignore the framework within which we operate. One of the things, as you move through this course and you move to your the compliance segment, you're going to see these big guys popping up every single time. CFATF, OECD, all of these various organizations, which puts out pronouncements. And these pronouncements become best practice. You follow them, or you in trouble. Plain and simple. All right, then.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You indicated earlier that the web cafes, the activity was not considered money laundering or illegal, right? So why is it that the financial institutions did no banking with them or didn't allow them to deposit the proceeds?
Because gambling was illegal.
Then, okay, so it has to do with the fact that, well, gambling is not really illegal in Ghana.
No, it was illegal. But I'll ask you a question because you're asking a very good question. I'm going to use that and
I
drive,
just wanted
and
clarity
drive a
in
point home.
one, because I
Okay.
never really
Here it is. You're asking me whether or not gambling was illegal. Yeah,
Right.
gambling was illegal. You shouldn't have gone into any place and buy numbers.
Right.
So it was illegal. And your question is, why isn't that money laundering? Because it's illegal.
Right.
And part of the definition of money laundering says it's illicit funds, right? Illegal, illicit.
Right.
Yeah. So the funds is illicit, and this is very important. May I have something here? So you have illegal funds, right? And that's from numbers, okay? But I'm telling you that it's not money laundering, and how can that make sense? It's stupid. Really, really challenge my logic. The logical person say it should be, right? But the lawyers inside here who study very hard, one of the terms they come up with at some point in time is that the law is a house. Plain and simple. The reason it's not money laundering is because the Proceeds of Crime Act says illegal numbers is not a predicate offense. I think the term to be used is that it is silent on it. If you go in the act, there is a list of offenses which constitute money laundering, right? Boom, boom, boom. I think they've changed it now. Boom, 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 boom. That wasn't there. And because that wasn't there, while it's illegal and you can still go to jail for gambling, right? You cannot be charged with laundering money. That's a technicality, right? You know, so it's an important question. And so when you read sometimes these broad definitions which says illegal, funds from illegal activities, right? That is true. But you still have to qualify, because if you're within a jurisdiction which doesn't recognize that, right, as a predicate offense, while you still may be charged with an illegal activity, you're not likely to be charged with money laundering. Take for example, hold your thought. Take for example, tax evasion, right? There is this thing in the Bahamas about tax evasion, tax avoidance. A lot of things in the United States, a lot of things that people do here when people come over from the States, right? People in the United States or other country consider them to be tax evasion, right? A lot of them the Bahamas doesn't recognize as tax evasion. Bahamas has no tax jurisdiction, basically. And consequently, when you read the news or you listen to the news in the United States, right? As far back as guys like Al Capone, right? The big gangsters. What were they charged for? Huh? Money laundering, right? Wire fraud, right? A lot of time, even though there seemed to be overwhelming evidence that what they were doing was gangster work, selling drugs and stuff, at the end of the day they can't prove that, but they could prove money laundering. In some jurisdiction, because the framework doesn't recognize a particular offense in that manner, it's not. It's just simple that.
But where the law may have been silent on money laundering, we can all agree that the funds that derived from the number business were illegal funds.
Yes.
That's where poker comes into play, because poker allows for the funds received or the proceeds of crime to be confiscated. So even as much as they may not have been charged with an offense under money laundering, the proceeds of that crime should have been confiscated.
Yeah, it could
They
have
should not have been granted licenses for subsequent years to operate in the business that they were operating in, and they should not have been allowed to actually even benefit from the proceeds of crime.
I agree with you from a moral point of view. Persons have actually been charged. The only point I'm making here is that it wasn't money laundering at that point in time. Right now, I think anybody who opens an illegal number business from they passed the law the other day going forward, that would be. It would be.
It would now be considered.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have a legal shop, if you have a shop now and you're not one of those persons who will be granted one of the licenses,
Right.
it will be. Yeah, so that's the difference.
If I may just say a word, please. The Proceeds of Crime Act speaks about criminal conduct. Proceeds of crime is different than the proceeds of criminal conduct. Criminal conduct gives a wider definition, and henceforth the proceeds, although illegal because it came from selling numbers, it still did not fall under poker because it did not fall under the definition of criminal conduct, as mentioned in the predicate offense. So it could have been seized during an operation, it could have been attached to the case and forfeited by a court, but we could not charge individuals with money laundering or indicate that it was from criminal conduct, which was defined in poker. So that's the challenge that we face. And notwithstanding, it was known that was a dilemma. It was never addressed until recently when they decided to.
But if we have
legal.
I understand your point, I get that, but if we have subsequent legislation that actually defines gambling as illegal, why couldn't it also be attached to that?
See,
Because the
again,
gambling speaks to it.
yeah, but the Gambling Act only deals with summary offenses. It's not an indictable offense, and that's the main thing.
Okay.
Indictable offense meaning 3
Yes,
years or
I
more, whatever the case may be, whatever. So it didn't fall under that. So it was a dilemma for all concerned, police officers, FIU as well. But hopefully it's corrected now.
I'm just trying to figure out why in 140 years now we just correcting a problem that's been happening.
If I put on my activist cap, I will walk with you. The bottom line is that we know what the real deal is. It's a reconciliation of what's socially acceptable. That's just what it is.
Just a follow-up question. So the proceeds that would have been derived from when it was illegal, now can that be accepted by the bank? I mean, how?
The bank is
Because it's now.
from the
Right.
houses, they're still not accepted.
That's not true.
Like
That's
the
not true.
Bahamas is accepted.
Yeah, but
Yeah, why does that
I work at Bank of the Bahamas, by the way.
yeah, Royal Bank.
Hold on. I work at Bank of the Bahamas, by the way. And it's a very interesting discussion. It's a very interesting discussion which is happening, right? It is widely rumored that only Bank of the Bahamas accepts this one. That's absolutely not true. I won't get into too much details, but that is not true.
But I checked several banks, and you guys were one of the banks.
Yeah, because I remember walking into Bank of
They're not taking the.
I remember.
They said they're taking persons who actually have winnings. They will take that because that's legal. But for the web owners, they're not doing it.
Because I walk into Bank of Bahamas and I saw one of the
Yeah.
big web shop owners.
It's one of the things that, you know-
It's like everyone, hi, Mister.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things which is taking place right now, but over time you'll see what the true story is.
But as-
It's not the case.
As a result of Bank of Bahamas having taken on these funds
Mhm.
from the web shop owners, haven't you also encountered a situation where you've had challenges with your correspondent banking situation as a result?
No.
No? But you've had challenges with your correspondent banking situation?
No. That's one of the rumors too, but Bank of the Bahamas is one of the topics in the news right now. You see, let me explain it to you this way so that you don't think I'm running away from it. the funds that we took from the web shop owners in the first instance were the funds which the government insists that they pay, right? You have Mr. FIU down there. It's a really funny situation. It's a funny situation. If you pay the government, right? If you pay money to the treasury, regardless of where it comes from, it's good. It's good money. It's a really, I mean, just 5 seconds ago, I know that the money you have was questionable. You pay the money to the treasury, right? And it comes back out to the treasury. Absolutely nobody does anything about it. It's good. It's good. It's just like when the government seizes funds from people and the treasury forfeits it, what do you think they do with it? They deposit it in the banks. That's what they do. And so, you know, it's a really funny situation. But as the whole gaming industry develops, you know, you all will see the real story. It's one of those industries which have creatively infiltrated the entire banking system, whole banking system. And it's not true that you know, it's Bank of the Bahamas. Since we started doing business with them, we have discovered that they have money in all the banks, every single one of them. I think maybe with the exception of Commonwealth Bank. I can honestly say maybe with the exception of Commonwealth Bank. Very serious. So it's just what it is. That too is a good example of how perception can affect your jurisdiction. Because persons on the outside looking in, if they take a view on the numbers industry, right, then they will take a view on financial services. You know, if we go back to what we were discussing, could that have reputational impact? Could that have some sort of negative implication for us as a society? Yes, it may. Would that be mitigated by what the government has done in terms of liberalizing, well, not liberalizing, but regularizing them? That may have its own impact. But here is a situation where persons who have a bird's eye view of what's happening in the Bahamas may draw some conclusion. And that may have implication for a system, but I'm hopeful that as we move forward, all of this is going to be cleared up and we won't have too much to worry about, right? Okay, on page 5, it talks about understanding what money laundering is. And it says here, it's important to understand what money laundering is, both in general terms and as it's defined by the laws that apply to you and your work. Very, very important. Well, I think what we've been laying here is kind of a very practical framework, but we have also been considering the definition. And one of the technicality is, if it's not a predicate offense, then it may not be. That doesn't mean it's not illegal, but it may not be. It says here, the term money laundering is in fact misleading and imprecise for a number of reasons. One of the first reasons is that, what it says there? Help me out.
It says it doesn't involve money.
It doesn't involve money.
And it can actually be property.
It actually be property.
What is derived from criminal,
So, how would that work? Help me out here, because as far as I know, money laundering is money laundering and it must involve some money. True? Tell me how you can launder without money. I like find when the book is wrong and show you.
You can exchange drugs for other items, maybe shipment and payment rather than it being money. You get luxury cars, yachts, property.
Too smart. Bang on, right? And again, that's why it's important that when we think about money laundering, we don't think about this in a very linear fashion, right? I'm now going to tie this up with what we have here. We're coming to the home stretch. We're going to be going early today so we can go get sauce and things like that. One of the most dangerous things to do is to be totally convinced, and it's in your book, that this 3-step layer is what money laundering is about. It's not. Right? One of the most dangerous things to do, or another dangerous thing to do, is to be convinced that money laundering must, at every single stage, involve money. So, let me pull out some of my dramatics again. I have a big yacht, 50 foot. Let's make it big. I have a big 50-foot yacht, right? And I have a house down in Live Key. True? And so, I can, what you say, sail that in, get into the slip there. And on that boat, I have some drugs. Yeah? So I bring that in. I'm not saying it now. Hypothetical. And so I bring that in, and I decided, like she said, because I have my yacht, I need some nice luxury cars to go with it. Yeah? And I know a guy who has about 5 luxury cars, each costing $200,000 each. The drugs I have is a value of $1 million. What do? Huh? I give it to him, right? And he gives me the cars. Those are now my cars, and the thing belongs to him. Or, so there's no money, there's not yet any banking system, right? There's nobody going in between, there's no layering, there's no splitting up, smurfing, no nothing. None of those fancy things which we will talk about in a bit. So it says one of the first things is that it could be limited to property, right? Don't have to be money, or indirectly represents the proceeds of crime. The second thing is that the term money laundering suggests that criminal property starts out in one form, then goes through some sort of laundering process and comes out in a different form. So you start with the illicit activity, whether it's smuggling, drugs, trafficking in people, blah, 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 blah. It gets converted, maybe go into the banking system, you get some deposit, and then at the end of the day you come out and you buy some fancy houses or some cars, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be that. When you think about laundering, what comes to mind? Just the word laundering. Laundering. Washing, right? Washing. So you take the dirty clothes, and you put it in the machine, and it wash, and then it have a rinse cycle, and a drying cycle, and the clothes come out nice and smooth. And if you have, what the thing name?
Down.
If you have down in it, you can, nice. This is good. It doesn't follow necessarily that process. And I really want you to not, while you need to understand this because it's part of the body of knowledge, right? I don't want you to lock yourself into that type of thinking because different things can happen in different ways. What you need to understand at the end of the day is there proceeds of an illegal activity, right? Has there been some sort of exchange? Has the individual sought to disguise, to move it, to convert it? All right? If that is taking place, then you need to be able to identify that laundering is happening, right? Drugs convert to cars, right? Let's say it's trafficking in people. You supply some girls who cannot move about freely, right? And he gets cash, or he gets a check from the individual he supplies with. It's laundering, right? That's laundering. But you don't see the precise stages as the book would describe it. And sometimes when persons don't see that, they automatically assume that, nothing is happening here. I can't see the placement, I can't see the layering, and I can't see the integration. Yeah? A lot of it happens sometimes in 2 steps. Maybe there is no placement, right? Maybe there's no layering, maybe there's no integration in its theoretical sense. So we need to be mindful of that. So money laundering here simply means doing something in relation to proceeds of crime that enables someone to benefit from the crime. Hear that? Money laundering simply means doing something in relation to the proceeds of crime that enables someone to benefit from the crime. So, going back to my example, if I take this illicit substance, right, and I get the cars, am I benefiting from the crime? Huh? What's the benefit? Huh? The cars. So there's a benefit to me, right? And somebody else took the other stuff, and I'm now benefiting from that. It need not be clever or complex arrangement, right? It can also extend to self-laundering and be as simple as spending stolen cash in a shop or deposited in the bank account. Yeah? So, thieving people money and then taking it down to John Bull and buying a nice fancy necklace. Laundering. As long as the legislation recognizes stolen money as a predicate offense, right? So do not get locked into these clean-cut layer. But of course, we still going to talk about that. Just skimming through, see if that's fine. All right, let's now look at recommendation 3 from FATF. See what are some of the things which constitute money laundering crime generally. Like I said before, right? FATF provides what? Best practice. And typically, when you move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, these are the same things which you may see. In many instances, legislations are copied. Yeah. When the Bahamas decided to do poker, it didn't go and create that on a blank sheet of paper. It went to the UK, pick up some stuff from Australia, maybe even pick up some stuff from the United States, right? Typically, us in common law jurisdiction borrow extensively from other jurisdictions. Pick up some stuff from Barbados, Jamaica, whatever, create this thing. So, FATF recommendation 3, money laundering offense requires that countries should apply the crime of money laundering to all serious offenses with a view of including the widest range of predicate offenses. So that's what the FATF is saying to jurisdictions out there. Huh? Oh, page 6. Sorry. The bottom of page 6, 1.7. The interpretive notes to recommendation 3 states that predicate offenses may be described by reference to all offenses or to a threshold link either to a category of serious offenses or to the penalty of imprisonment applicable to the predicate offenses. That is the threshold approach, or to a list of predicate offenses or a combination of these approaches. Basically what it's saying is, you either say all illegal activities will be a predicate offense, or you create thresholds. Maybe summary offenses are not indictable offenses, which requires X amount of years, maybe predicate offenses, or there's another approach where you actually list. Obviously, it's supposed to be an exhaustive list. I think that's what the Bahamas did, right? But it didn't include numbers in there. And consequently, it wasn't a predicate offense. So, here are some categories which are listed, right? There are 21 categories of offenses. Participation in organized criminal group and racketeering. So that would be, one of your gangs, hound dog, dog pound, whatever the name, right? And they may be extorting people. So they come and they walk downtown and they say to the John Bull people, we need $5 $40,000 a month, otherwise you ain't doing no business around there. Extortion. They walk over the hill and they collect rent, quote unquote, from the shops, protection money, stuff like that. Or they sell drugs, or they run guns, or whatever it is. So organized crime. Terrorism, including terrorist financing, trafficking in human beings, and migrant smuggling. And this is a very interesting one. We have heard news where persons have caused other people to jump on boats and take them to the United States, right? From right here in the Bahamas. That's trafficking in people. But I don't have to do that. For example, I can take your passport, lock you in a house, don't allow you freedom of movement. That's actually trafficking in people. So sometimes there are subtleties to these things which some persons don't readily understand. But there are many ways in which this can happen, all right? Sexual exploitation, including sexual exploitation of children. We read on the news where you have tourists travel to be with little girls and little boys. You have the pimps at works, they are prostitutes, and sell that sort of stuff. So that would be included. Illicit trafficking in narcotic drugs or psychotropic substances. So that would be your cocaine, your opium, your ecstasy, the what they call them, social drugs, your marijuana, all that sort of stuff. Illicit arms trafficking, trafficking in stolen or other goods. Corruption or bribery. So you bribe an official to get a contract. You bribe an official to move your business quickly, to get a license, whatever it is. Fraud, thief the people money. Appropriation by ways of employment, that sort of thing. Counterfeiting currency. Photocopying money, making it look real. That would be an offense. Counterfeiting or piracy of products. Oh, down the road right there. Huh? That's what? It's not? I don't think so.
It is.
I think we sitting like literally 10 feet from that example. And it's an expanding 10 feet. I really don't understand it. But it's there. We remember that some of our guys went to New York and they were arrested. So Louis Vuitton. If you don't look at it very closely, you don't see that it's not Nike, but it's Mikey or something like that. And those ones are not so bad. Those are kind of knockoff. But you have people really out there selling some stuff that look like the authentic thing. That's illegal. And again, this is one of the things we need to understand. This is the best practice of the world looking in on us, right? But when you come here, you see it happening. And so that raises question as to how does this work? None of them are made it.
Exactly, and they got arrested in New York where it was made. And they have a whole Chinatown that the world knows about. And yet, what happens? Nothing happens to the people that actually make them and sell them here.
One of the most interesting things I've seen, I don't travel a lot, so even though I'm an old man, when I go to places, I'm still like a child, right? So I get this thing. And I go to New York and I see these guys, they're mostly Africans, and they're selling these things on the street, right? In some big tarpaulin, right? And every 5 minutes they wrap them up and throw them on their back and run gone. And then I look around and see like a police or something. I don't know how they see them so quickly. And I'm sitting there, right? And I'm saying, this is New York. This is the United States, right? This is supposed to be the bastion of everything which is good, but right there, right on the streets, these things are happening. And they're selling illegal goods because I think they're the same knockoff bags and stuff that they're selling. And guess what? People are buying them by the tow. Yeah? Just like how the people walk inside a building and then walk straight up the street. That's exactly what environmental crime, piracy of products, we talk about that. Murder, grievous bodily harm, kidnapping, illegal restraint, hostage taking, robbery or theft, smuggling, including in relation to custom and excise duty taxes, tax crimes related to direct taxes or indirect taxes, extortion, forgery, piracy, insider trading, market manipulation. So here we have a huge laundry list, no pun intended, of offenses which at the international level, at the global level, would be considered to predicate offense. The expectation is that our system, our framework locally recognizes that. All right? To the extent that that happens on a consistent basis, that's up for debate, but that's not this class, right? So we now understand the linkages between where these things emanate from on an international basis, the way they would then flow into our local legislation, regulations, guidelines, right? The fact that the law itself, maybe we would say the enabling legislation, FOCA, determines and defines what is and what is not, right? But when we think about that, especially within an academic environment, because when you sit down to do your exam, right, you can't be limited to what happened in the Bahamas. This is a UK exam, right? So you need to have an appreciation, really, of how the world views these things. And so when you speak about them, you need to speak about them within the context of its internationalized perspective, right? Not just what gives in the Bahamas. Because remember that each jurisdiction has some level of freedom. They may go yay far, right? And not as far as is expected. The implications of that, but every country has the right to do that. All right. So we talk about who are launderers, and that comes natural. Much has been done. Who are launderers? It's important to recognize that while you may think that a money launderer think of the money launderer as a person or persons who have committed or arranged the original crime. In fact, anyone who assists in the process of enabling that person or persons to use the property and conceal its origin has played a part in the money laundering process. Let's use a simple example. All of us, I shouldn't say that. When you generalize too much, you always get it wrong. But many of us, or at least some of us, may have one or two cousins we don't like. Yeah? I don't really have none. But we know people we don't like. Or at least we have some friends that our mothers told us, say hi to them but don't hang out with them too much. So let's say you have one of those friends who you were schooled with in preschool, primary school, high school, and even went to college. But you know he's a bad boy, right? He's the one who always coming up with a deal. He's the one who is always getting you in the club. That's all the thing, right? And so, all of a sudden, both of you come back from college, and you working hard, and he's supposedly working hard. You struggling, and he's not. And so you have lots of stuff. And he comes to you and says, I have a house over Winton, one down in Life Arcade, and one over PI. Which one of them you want me to put in your name? Which one did you choose? PI, right? Life Arcade, all right. The question is, why is he doing this? He doesn't want it to be in his name. And you smart because you've been to college, you figure out what is happening. You know him as your friend, right? He can hide stuff from his mother, but he can't hide it from you. And so you say, that's cool, man. You're my boy. Put it in my name. You facilitated him benefiting from this house, right? Because you're not going to live there mainly. You may have access to it. But what is he trying to do is to separate himself from the legal ownership of that property. You are assisting him, right? And as it says here, is that anyone who assists the process of enabling the person or persons to use the property and conceal its origin has played a part in the process of money laundering. We've heard stories locally of guys who have put stuff in their mother name, their daughter name, that sort of stuff, right? We're not going to speak to that. We don't know how true or false those things are. But if it turns out to be that these things were obtained illegally, the unwitting mother, in most cases, is actually a launderer. She is. Because she's assisting him to glean benefit and to secure the ownership of the property, right? I go back to the fact that as institutional persons, you may also facilitate laundering by either doing it actively or turning, well, if you turn a blind eye, that's active because you know. But there's also a reasonable standard of performance which can be brought to bear. You ought to know, right? You're the one who's sitting in front of me for the last 50 minutes. You're the ones who are going to be completing the money laundering and then the ICA. You're the ones who are going to become compliance officer. You now no longer ordinary people. You're not the Joe on the street. So when the question is asked, right, what would a reasonable person who, having gone through all the internal training in the institution, who have sat the ICA, who have passed it with flying colors, what would they have done? You are going to be held to a different standard, right? And in that way, you could be found guilty. So you got to be very careful. Go back to the example of the Lebanese bank. What did they conclude? That the Lebanese bank facilitated money laundering, right? Now, we don't have sufficient details there to know exactly what took place, how it broke down, whether it was somebody deep in the organization who facilitated that. So we can only speculate. But at the end of the day, the institution, once you zoom out, the institution facilitated it, right? Were they, the persons, actively in the crime? No. Was the company out there dealing drugs, selling them? No. But they were part of that process. So we got to bear that in mind, all right? Are we doing for time? We're doing very good. All right. What can I clean up? What can I clean up? All right. Anybody need to stretch your legs? Go to the restroom? No? Good? No? All right, let's roll on then. So let's get into the crux of the matter then. You know, some of this we've debunked already, some of it we've discussed. But it's important to follow through on what the book says. So how is money laundered? Yeah? How is money laundered? I know you're going to be a little bit tentative because I know a couple of the things you said before, right? But how is money laundered? In the classic sense, the three-layer happens, right? In the classic sense, that's what's in your book. On page 8, it tells you a 2.1 placement, right? Then at page 11, 2.2, it says layering, and at page 2.3, it says integration. So, that is for real. So how is money laundered? There's many ways of doing it. It says here that traditionally, money laundering process has been defined as having three main stages. Placement, where cash is derived from criminal activity and is infused into the financial system. Layering, which refers to usually involve complex system of transaction designed to hide the source of the ownership of the funds. And integration is a stage at which the laundered fund is reintroduced into the legitimate economy, appearing to have originated from a legitimate source. So, first and foremost, you get the cash and you put it in the bank. That's what the traditional system says, right? Sometimes this involves all sorts of gymnastics. Smurfing. You know what smurfing is? Anybody watch cartoons? You know what the Smurfs are? What they are? Little beanie people. Smurfing is where you have, let's say you have $100,000. Rather than go to the bank and lodge $100,000, which is going to cause you challenges, what would you do?
Several businesses.
You go to
Several banks.
several banks. Well, first of all, one of the things you want to know is what's the limit? How much they going to check?
$10,000.
$10,000, right? So I want to deposit less than that. Yeah? And so I break that up into maybe 20 deposits of $5,000 each. And so I have a lot of banks. Yeah? Or a lot of people who bank for me. And we deposit them into there, right? So there are techniques which are applied in actually creating the placement. You go to put the stuff in the bank, you want to break it up so that you fly right under the threshold. Of course, the smart guys are always the launderers. Don't forget that. You're never as smart as a launderer. Because all of the stuff that we generally study is as a result of having observed the launderer, we just kind of catching up to them. But in response to that, systems have been created. So for example, you open an account with RBC or Scotiabank or whatever, and you have an account at each of the branch, which is possible. And so you go and you place this and that. And so they have systems which run at the end of the day and pull all of this deposit together and say $100,000, you put it in 5, all of the red flags go off and the compliance people start to look into stuff like that. So that is important, right? So you have your placement. Let's see what the FATF advises. The FATF advises that the first feature of that money laundering and terrorist financing abuse prevalently is cash and variable negotiation instrument. No wonder why bearer shares went away, right? So cash and checks and this other stuff. Back in the days, there used to be stuff like traveler's check. Those are not popular anymore. The use of cash or currency, for instance, banknotes and coins as a medium, is attractive to criminals mainly because of that word, I can't pronounce it, and lack of audit trail. And that's an important aspect as you consider your fight for or your fight against money laundering. One of the things you need to understand is that cash-rich businesses are very risky. If I have a lot of money to launder, I'm opening a bank. Yeah? Not a bank. A bar.
Gas station.
A gas station. I go and sell chicken. Huh?
Convenience store.
Convenience store.
Numbers
What?
business.
Numbers business. Cars.
Yeah, cosmetics.
Cosmetics. I am going to have a business which generates lots of cash. You walk into my bar. I was actually explaining this to my daughter last night. She was reading something. And I said, you walk in my bar on day 1, you take a photograph. You walk in my bar on day 2, you take another photograph. You walk in my bar on day 3, you take another photograph, and you superimpose all 3 of them on each other, and there's no change. Not a bottom move. You know, it's an extreme example, really. But I literally could do that. I don't need nobody to come into my bar and buy no rum. All I need is to have a bar, right, with some people passing through now and again. And even if they do buy rum, I only need to sell something. So if on a daily basis they come in and they buy $100 worth of goods, right, I could deposit $10,000. Where is your source of fund? My bar on XCOM. I need something which gives legitimacy to my cash taken. And so as part of our approach to AML, we must treat, or we always treat, cash business as highly suspect. And just so I can mess with some of you, what's the difference between a bar and a church? Simply from a cash perspective, not that. Simply from a cash perspective. I'm not talking about Jesus and God. You understand what I'm saying? So, when you sit down to look at which entity, which units, which type of business may pose a risk to you, don't focus on, that's why I threw the church in there, don't focus on the nature of the activity, focus on the nature of how the funds flow. People go to church and they put cash. Right? So it could be used. It could be used. We have known pastors who have not always been good pastors, right? Alright, so criminals look for as much flexibility as possible and are interested in avoiding detection. Cash provides that flexibility as it's universally accepted and can be used and moved with little or no record keeping. Cash proceeds are often used to purchase further commodities and services. Some criminals also stockpile large amounts of cash as a form of security. Yeah? So they put the cash in the mattress, or they create vaults and put the stuff in. Many of the major sources of criminal proceeds, particularly narcotics trafficking, generate large amounts of cash. Criminals perpetrating some types of fraud tend to avoid laundering cash, preferring instead to purchase goods and pay expenses with check and electronic wire transfer. However, identity fraud, access device fraud, and bank fraud can generate large amounts of cash. For example, criminals engage in access devices fraud, extract money from cash dispensers and ATM, using stolen ATM cards and so on and so forth. In cash-intensive economies, illegal money can easily be integrated into national economy. In such economies, large cash transactions may be very common, as individuals are more likely to conduct transactions in cash and carry a lot of it around. That sound familiar? There's some places in the Bahamas where you go and pull out your credit card and they look at you with, where the hell are you going with that? Right? For two reasons. One, they say, if I process that transaction, they're going to take some sort of commission from me and I'm not going to make the same amount of money. Some people just love cash. It's simple. Right? And so, where cash is heavily accepted, right, then the susceptibility to laundering is going to be high. You have some economies, the United States and so on, which is a little bit more developed and credit card is readily accepted. It's happening in the Bahamas too, right? But some places, for the most part, people don't walk around with cash, or very little. You can find a typical guy walking on the Bahamas and he pulls out his wallet and he has $300. Not because he's doing anything bad, but that's just the way he is. He carries his money with him. He don't have a credit card, all right? Cash is easily acceptable and can be interchanged with most goods and services. It can be used for value transformation, which further distances the criminal from the crime. Finally, criminals and terrorists wish to finance other crimes while avoiding detection. So you have bulk cash smuggling. Cash smuggling can be subdivided into two categories. These are bulk cash and they are cash couriers. We don't need to go through all of that. You can read that. Disguised deposit, where the launderers divide large amounts of cash into a number of small transactions, amounts, for example, less than 10,000, for instance. So this is what we were talking about earlier. By making several deposits into single or multiple accounts, making deposits into a number of accounts using different banks, depositing cash into accounts of third parties such as the lawyers. This is one of the things that we need to be very, very careful about. Right? Within the Bahamas, there's a number of institutions, lawyers, accountants, real estate agents, who by law are regarded as financial institutions for certain transactions. Right, Mr. Lawyer? Yeah. But it becomes very easy for some of these guys to be used to facilitate money laundering. As a financial institution, as a bank for example, you may have an account for a lawyer, a law firm, right? And that account they usually refer to it as a client account, true? And that may have, let's say, $20 million. It's a big firm, right? So the guy goes to the lawyer and gives the lawyer the money. However, he gives it to the lawyer, and the lawyer then deposits it in your bank, right? Sometimes the standard which is observed by the lawyers, even though they have obligation to do so, may not be as stringent. And so these represent weak spots, right? And you have to bear in mind that once the money is in your system, in your institution, there is implication for you, right? Because some regulators, or at least some other jurisdiction, when they impose sanctions against you, they have no obligation to come inside there and say, of this 20,000, this particular $5,000 is relating to this particular guy and it's illicit. All they need to establish is that it is 5,000, and whatever money they have under their control, they'll take $5,000 from that. The Patriot Act, for example, gives the United States the right to do that. Huh? So they don't care about where the 5,000 is or which account it is in. They establish that it is in your institution and they grab it. So we need to be very, very mindful of that. The use of monetary instruments. So you purchase monetary instruments such as money order, postal orders, traveler's check. Those things are not very popular these days, traveler's checks. But you take the cash, $10,000, right? You buy a money order and you walk down the road to do a transaction. Doesn't it look different? Rather than walking in with a bag of money, cash, single notes adding up to $10,000, or you come with a money order which says $10,000. Guess what? A couple of things happen, right? In order to get the money order, in the first instance, you have to buy it from an institution, yeah? So the next institution that sees the individual with the transaction of the money order, the level of the level of suspicion sometimes goes down. Yeah? You walk in with cash, all sorts of bells and whistles go off, right? You walk in with an instrument, look a bit different. So you gotta be mindful of that. Intermingling, so taking the proceeds from an illegal activity, putting it into a legitimate business, right? And saying that's the proceeds from that business. So you intermingle it. Hence, one of the reasons why launderers or persons with illicit activities also want to do legitimate business. They want to hold car lots. They want to get into construction. They want to do development. They want to own shops, bars, all of that sort of thing, right? That's one of the ways of doing it. Or purchasing assets, so they purchase land, cars, whatsoever they are desire, right? Okay. So that takes place that's the placement. That's getting the money into the system. Alright? Now we need to do what? Huh? No, not without introducing it. Yeah. And it says here that layering, once the cash has been successfully placed in the financial system, launderers can engage in almost infinite number of complex transactions and transfer designed to disguise the audit trail and thus the source of the property. So, you have the money, you're a launderer. Your first hurdle is to get it into Big Bang. Once you get it in there, there's a lot of options you have, right? So let's say you got $1 million in, right? Now, what would you do? Think about it. Be creative. Be a launderer for a second. What would you do?
If you got it in the bank.
No, yeah. You have it in the bank now. Some way, somehow, you got the $1 million in. Wire transfer. You buy stocks and bonds, right? You transfer some to your offshore account in Cayman, right? Some in BVI. You put some over there, right? You decide, well, I'm going to buy some apartments. Yeah? So you buy a triplex.
Or you get a loan.
Huh?
Or you can even get a loan from the bank on your money.
You get a loan secured by the thing, right? Nice thinking. That's a nice way to launder money. Or a nice way to separate yourself from the money, right? Borrow the loan, secured by the $1 million. Don't pay back. True. And that's why I said these things can, while we may think through this thing linearly and go through this complex process, if I get the placement in, right, I can skip some of this and go to integration. Because while technically, yes, it would be some aspect of layering, I go to my bank officer and I say, I have $1 million in a fixed deposit, right? I want to borrow $900,000 because I'm smart and I know there's some interest involved, and if I don't pay this back, there's going to be some late charges and stuff and things, right? So I borrow 900,000. And because I'm a guy who does illegal stuff and money is not a problem for me, right? Giving up $100,000 for $900,000 is cheap, easy. So I borrow the money, right? And I don't pay. So month 1, they call me, I say, leave me alone. Month 2, they call me, I say, leave me alone. Month 3, the loan is now delinquent, non-accrual, and they're really getting serious. And I say to them, what are you bothering me for? Right? Isn't this a secure loan? As a matter of fact, take your money. I know you bother me too much. I'm in my bed sleeping, you calling me. You guys are a bunch of, I don't really want to do business with you. Irks me. Pay off the loan. So there's some charges and interest and thing, right? They pay the loan off and there's some money left over. Give me back my money. I want the check because I don't want to do business with you no more. Guess what? This loan was to buy a house. Is that integration? Is it? It is integration. Yeah? And better yet, the rest of the check that they give me back because their service sucks, I now have a check from a bank that I'm now going to deposit in another bank. And all of a sudden, the suspicion level goes down. I take my money and I buy an annuity from an insurance company. However, I get it in there. Maybe I have to slip something to the other guy, but I buy the annuity. Right? And then I call him back up 2 months later and say, I don't want this annuity. And the man say, you know, if you break this, right, the penalties are huge. And he say, you worry about that for? Let me worry about that. Give me my check. I don't like you all no more. And so my $1 million annuity, after they charge me, they take $50,000 out. I get $950,000. But guess what do I have? I have $950,000 on a check from an insurance company. And I go. So, again, you may not readily identify the 3-step layer. Then again, you could. Because putting the money, buying the annuity is the placement, right? Tricking the people to give you back because you say yourself could be to some extent layering, but not in its classic sense, because the layering suggests that you move monies to different places, right? But in a way, if we discount layering in that example, right, we could automatically say we move from placement to integration. Because now, what is integration? What's the fundamental aspect of integration?
To be able to use it and it appears to be clean.
The money appears to now be clean. So me with a check on a financial institution, which makes it even nicer because the financial institutions are subject to the same regulations which I'm going to circumvent, which is why sometimes, it ought not to be, but sometimes people drop their guard a little bit, right? Because remember, within the confines of your jurisdiction, you have a right, you can rely on some of the work which is done by the other institution. Ultimately, you are responsible for being accountable for the process, right? But you could rely. And a lot of time, people see the money coming in, they look at the guy and they're not 100% sure about him, but they ask themselves a question, he went through all of this process. How long was the money there, all this sort of thing? There are elements that may emanate from this, which may cause you to say, I'll take it. You got a question?
And just going off of that, because a lot of times when you see like the forms in the banks for KYC, they ask you, what is your source of wealth?
Yeah.
In most cases, people put investment, real estate, and the banks just accept that on face value. Okay, he banks with HSBC and he had investments, but we don't go into the extent of asking, how long was your investment there? What did you invest in? What was the money? We don't ask those questions.
Well, those questions get asked to the guy you suspect.
Yeah.
Now, you're right. There need to be, and some banks do. It depends. But there are instances where more should be done. You have this whole issue, as you mentioned, source of wealth. You know, there's It's two separate things. There's source of funds and there's source of wealth. Source of funds is where did this particular money you have in your hand come from? And source of wealth, in really simple terms, is where you get all of that money from. So you came to deposit $50,000 and you say, well, I just got my ACE withdrawal. That's my source of funds, right? But you setting up maybe a business with an offshore company, you now want to become a trust customer, right? And you have house, land, car, blah, 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 blah. And they ask you, where's your source of wealth? Well, my very rich grandmother died and left me all of these things. That's your source of wealth. That's legitimate. But some people can't explain that. Some people have a bar, you remember the bar I have up on Corner X, right? That makes $5,000 a month. I only opened it 2 years ago, but I'm a multimillionaire. Yeah? So, investigation or at least questions in those directions where you can reconcile those two things. So, layering, as it says here, is so one of the primary objectives of the layering stage of laundering is to confuse any criminal investigation and place as much distance as possible between the source of the ill-gotten gains and their present status and appearance, right? And one of the things which can do that very quickly is what? Huh? Wire transfers. So, need to clean out something. So let's say I'm into illicit activities, right? And I have some money and I get it into a bank, right? And so this is jurisdiction 1. I may have something over here in jurisdiction 2. I'll have, let's say I set up Bad Boy Trust. Yeah? That's Bad Boy Trust. And on the Bad Boy Trust is Bad Boy Codes. Right? Of course it wasn't going to be named that, right? And then under that, again, is going to be some other companies. And I literally can have these companies in different jurisdictions, yeah? One could be a BVI company, one could be Cayman, one could be over there in even Delaware, right? And so the monies that I got into the system here, I then transfer it to Bad Boy Trust, right? What have I done? What have I done? Sorry. I have an account at this bank, right? And the account is in my name. Yeah? So I got the money in. We the placement stage, right? I then transfer the money out to Bad Boy Trust.
Disassociated yourself with the funds?
Huh?
You're no longer associated with the funds?
No longer associated with a fund.
Yeah.
By putting the money in a trust, who is the legal owner of the fund?
Trustees.
So I am creating distance between myself, from a legal perspective, and the funds. So I am the beneficial owner. I will benefit from it, but legally it's not mine. It's in this, right? And to make it further complicated, this trust owns these companies. And what we do is we flow the money down to them. And these companies one may be a property holding, one may be a condo holding, that sort of thing. We put the money there. When I need some cash, because I am the beneficiary, or my family and stuff, we are the beneficiary of this, all we need to do is to make this one pay that a dividend and da. Now, during an investigation, the guy says, smart policeman, oh yeah, you put the money here. And he finds that very quickly. And then he works hard, very long time if he ever does, in solving that. Because there's a lot of people and a lot of distance, and I'm messing up the audit trail, right? muddying the waters to make sure that there's sufficient distance between me and them. And in case of an investigation, it's difficult to pin that back to me. Right? So as it says here, one of the main objective of the primary objective of the layering stage, right, is to really find a way which you can confuse potential investigators and make it separate from you and them. And so that's important. All right? Okay. So now we get to integration. This is the final stage of the process whereby the criminal derived property that has been placed and layered and therefore cleaned is returned to the legitimate economy. It is perhaps better described as reintegration because of course it was in there. But I think the strict use of integration is a recognition that when it comes back, right, it's coming back into what we now refer to as the formal economy, and it originated from black economy. The fact that they say reintegration here is a recognition, I think, that there is that nexus between the two. You know, there's always that nexus. Most successful economies, as a fact, really have a nice, big black economy attached to it. True? Rum running, drugs running. Check out the United States. Taken to its end power, the UK, we go all the way back to slavery. Far the way thing, but you know, that was a different time. So the reintegration, therefore, takes on different methods. We talked about some of them. Loan agreements. Funds may be transferred from offshore to onshore accounts controlled by the launderer and made to appear as if they're loans. You have sham transactions. Payments made from offshore to onshore account controlled by the launderer, and they give the appearance as if they're legitimate transactions. Gifts and inheritance. I give something to my mother, I give something to my son, daughter, that sort of thing, or relative. Redemption of life policies, we talked about that. You know, you have persons who take out big life insurance policies with oodles of dollar value. Redemption of that, they pay the, what do you call it? Whatever penalties for early redemption, and they move on. So these are ways of doing that. Purchase of real estate, that comes very natural. As an example, in June 2005, the Northern Ireland Recovery Agency was granted an interim receiving order in Belfast Court for asset value of an estimated $1.4 million. The assets in question was held by Stephen Baxter and his wife Denise. It is in his application to the High Court, the agency evidence that Mr. Baxter purported to trade as an ice cream salesman with 2 vans. 1.4 million. Ice cream tradesman with 2 vans. However, no street trading license had ever been granted, making the vans recoverable property. The agency also showed that on a number of occasions, police had detected Mr. Baxter smuggling tobacco from his vans. So rather than ice cream, it's tobacco. His lifestyle and property acquisition appeared to be far in excess of his lawful means. The assets include a principal residence in Belfast, 2 apartments in Belfast City Centre, and interest in a further 8 building developments, and a planned apartment in a prestige Belfast development. The agency advised that they had intervened to prevent Mr. Baxter from extending his property portfolio shortly before the hearing. The total value of the property subject to the restraint order was estimated at $1.4 million. So here's a classic example of somebody who is carrying out a legitimate business, selling ice cream. But you would expect that an individual selling ice cream would have reasonable wealth, right? Moderate wealth. But here he has a total portfolio of $1.4 million. And rather than selling ice cream, he's actually trading in tobacco, obviously without a license, so that's illegal. So that's an example of an individual using what appeared to be a legitimate business to facilitate the integration, right? So he gets involved in development, he gets involved in, he buys an apartment, and obviously he's living the lavish lifestyle, right? So the last thing we need to explore, and we've talked about it consistently from Jump Street because I think it's really, really, really important, is to have an understanding that there's a huge limitation attached to taking this linear view of money laundering. It's way more fluid than that, right? What this does is give you the impression that you are on a train from Nassau to Inagua, if that was possible, right? So you jump on the train at station 1, and being a train, it's not a car, a certain enough a ship. It has to stay on the track, right? And so you have to move on the track. So you move from 1, then you get to 2, then you get to 3. Classic linear thinking. What usually happens for some students or some people is simply this. I'm taking out 2. Anybody watch cartoons? I like cartoons a lot. A typical cartoon scene would be, bring Daffy Duck, and he counts 1, 2, 3. Rub out number 2, what would Daffy Duck do in a cartoon? For the rest of the cartoon. 1, and keep counting 1. Cannot move from 1. Can't get to 3 because I've eliminated 2. Be careful of that type of linear thinking because, as we have proved or we've shown over and over, it doesn't have to follow that strict 1, 2, 3. Don't be a locomotive. Don't have to get to station 2 before you get to station 3. Think about, at the end of the day, what is being achieved. Are they separating it? Right? Is there a way that the individual is benefiting it? Consider, does this look like there has been reintegration? Money, house, is that reintegration? Right? Crime, house. Crime, asset. There's no 2. Right? So be careful that when you use this taxonomy, right here, this categorization, this classification, that you don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself to thinking about it in this way. And if you do that, you're going to be totally, totally okay. So, in a nutshell, this morning, we have looked at the whole issue of what money laundering is, right? We look at what the implications of money laundering implications are. We have identified and agreed that there is a framework against which we work, all right? Or which we use, an enabling framework usually made up of what? Legislations, regulations, and agencies. And that helps us in the whole fight against money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. And then we learned the different phases which you could go through. A traditional classification. And I use that in a pronounced way, a traditional classification, but as we see, it doesn't have to be like that, right? And so we understand that there are certain instances where there may be an offense. And because the offense is not enabled by the legislation, it does not qualify as a predicate offense for anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing. We have also looked at and appreciated the fact that there is a significant amount of influence which emanates from international organizations, right? OECD and so on and so forth. And the most important one for our purpose at this point in time is the FATF, which becomes the standard bearer, the best practice. And the expectation is that most jurisdictions around the world are going to be abiding by that. So we see in a nutshell how that works, what the implications are, what would happen if and when there are breakdowns and breaches in the systems, right? We've seen the example with the Lebanese Canadian Bank, and the fact that the risk crystallizing from a money laundering point of view, right, has implication for the institution, the jurisdiction, and also have adverse influence on the global financial services. And importantly, from your perspective, you can go to jail. So it has implications for the individual. All right? So that is your first unit. I think that's sufficient for this morning. You have any questions? Anything you anticipated that wasn't done? All right, what I want you to do is simple this. I would like for you to go back and read this over. Never trust the teacher. Absolutely don't ever trust the teacher. I am here, I'm saying things to you. There clearly may be gaps in terms of what I said or what you heard, in terms of what you understand. Hopefully I haven't done so, but some of these things I've been doing for a while, so some things come natural and I may just assume some things. So I want you to go back and read this over. And so come next week, if you have any questions, anything that you don't understand, let's pick up on that first and we move into Unit 2. I also would like to encourage you to go to the FATF website and download the FATF guideline. If you wish, you could go to the central bank and download its guideline, because those are going to be useful, and also to remind yourself of what the local framework is. One of the things that typically happens in these exams is it would give you a scenario, and then it would say, for a jurisdiction of your choice, which more than likely is going to be your country. Answer this within that perspective. So you want to know what is in the books, and this usually, like I say, take on an internationalized flavor. But you also want to have a reasonable appreciation of what the rules and the guidelines and the regulations are locally. The earlier you start that, the better it is for you. Right? So this is not a rocket science course, really, but it's not easy. You need to really pay attention to your nuts and bolts. The next segment of the course, which is the compliance, builds on this. So these are fundamental nuts and bolts, if you will. You need to get this right. You need to get a full appreciation, and if you can apply this practically, the more you can take what's here and apply it in a practical sense, which is what the central bank guidelines and the FATFs and stuff will do for you, the better you're going to be. Because it takes on life of its own, and you're able to express it better. All right? So if there's no questions, thank you so much. All right? Somebody iPad it.
I'm looking at it, I know. You want to know more? Right there, huh? This woman, they bought some Polish chips. So she
Minutes. Sounds good.